Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to the October 11th edition of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party. We have this morning to assist me, Matt Stremovich and Linda Yaram from Democratic Services. And from the Planning Department, we have Planning Policy Manager Mark Ashwell. We have the team leader Ian Withington and Rakesh Dhaliwal to assist us with the main business agenda items. In accordance with usual protocol, if I can just remind members to perhaps mute or switch off any likely devices such as mobiles that may interfere with our transmission. And if anyone not addressing the meeting could switch off their video link and mute, which of course doesn't apply to the members of the working party who should remain connected at all times. I think that probably deals with the sort of routine announcements. So if we can go straight to the agenda, item 1, apologies for absence. I believe, Linda, we have Councillor Kershaw, who has tendered his apologies, and Councillor Wendy Fredericks has kindly agreed to substitute. We have apologies from Councillor Nigel Dixon, with Councillor Angie Fitch-Tillett kindly offering to substitute. And we have apologies from Councillor Peter Fisher, with Councillor Victoria Holliday kindly substituting in that respect. And I believe Councillor Stockton may not be on the call, is that correct?
Can't see him on the call. I think he may have given his apologies.
May have given his apologies, right. Thank you very much, Linda. So that concludes item 1. Item 2, public questions. I'm not aware of any, Linda, but if I can just confirm that with you.
That's correct. We have no public questions today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. So item 3. Now, rather exceptionally on this occasion, we have 2 sets of minutes to approve. These are the minutes of the meeting on the 16th of August and last month on the 13th of September. So if I can just ask members to have a look at those minutes, I'll take them together, if I may. And if you would turn to the minutes, first of all, for the 16th of August, if I can just go through page by page. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Any questions or queries? I'm not seeing any. So if we move to the minutes for Monday the 13th of September, so if we go through numerically with the agenda paper numbers, page 7 is the first one, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, and finally page 13. Any questions or comments? Don't think there are any. So I propose that we accept both these sets of minutes. Could I please have a seconder? Councillor Grove-Jones, first in time. Thank you very much for that. Those are approved, and I will sign them in due course, Linda, when we are able to do so. So that takes care of item 3. Item 4, items of urgent business. I don't believe there are any, Linda.
No, there are no.
No items of urgent business. Item 5, declarations of interest. So if we refer to the standard information provided, I think it's on pages 15 and 16. And could I ask if any members have any declarations of interest, pecuniary or otherwise, to please let us know at this stage.
Mr. Chairman, I know the landowner of the Rowton Road site. I have accepted hospitality from them, so I will abstain on this particular one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzgerald. Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, bearing in mind the comments that were made at the last meeting, although I live on land that is owned by Mr. Cabell Manners, I confirm once again that I've accepted no hospitality, no invitation, no discussion, and no letter, email, anything as regards the proposal on Rowton Road. And I wish that to be minuted as that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can note those comments from both members in respect of declarations of interest. So I think we're happy to progress to item 6, update on matters from previous meeting. I don't believe there are any matters to discuss under this item. And so we can move on to the first of 3 main items of business on the agenda. So item 7, local plan strategic policies. I hope that members have had an opportunity to follow the link on Modern Gov to the draft latest local plan version 4.4, I think, from memory, and have a look at that in terms of how it's formatted and its content. And if I may, at this stage, hand over to Mr. Ian Withington to present this agenda item. Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll introduce it. You have before you on page 17 of the agenda pack a report that what I call on the front end of the plan. Basically, this is the introduction, the context, and the strategic policies. Now, in order to produce this, many months of hard work and refinement has gone into these policies, not least by yourselves and the steer that this working party has given, but colleagues across the policy team, housing and environmental colleagues. It's a culmination of approximately 2 years' work, takes account of the changes in national guidance and reflects updated evidence. But in particular, the version that you have in front of you in Appendix 1 amends the Regulation 18 version in relation to the feedback received at the time and links into the corporate plan and the environmental charter. Accompanying this document will be further statutory documents, such as a consultation statement, which details or provides the specific details how each policy has been amended in relation to the feedback that has been received. Other documents include the sustainability appraisal report, the habitat regulations report, and a host of supporting evidence. None of that is before you today, though. This report details how the plan essentially has been updated to enable upfront consideration of climate change principles rather than its predecessor, which contained policies throughout, and gives an overview of its structure. So attached to the report in Appendix 3 shows how the policies themselves have changed and are renumbered, so you can follow through from what policy Reg 18 is now Reg 19. And in Appendix 2 is a flow diagram which shows a summary of how climate change is taken into account, which you may recall earlier in the year, Working Party requested that we put in the local plan. While the policies themselves are contained in the attachment that Andrew referred to there as Appendix 1, we are now essentially at what we call Regulation 19 to 22 in the local plan regulations. And these detail the next round of statutory process and consultation and progression to examination. Regulation 19 itself deals with the publication of a document and how you make it available for inspection. Regulation 20 deals with who can make representations, and Regulation 22 deals with the documents required and informs us that all comments made at this stage must then be summarized and copied and submitted with any submission document for examination. So it's a combination of those regulations at the stage that we are at. Now at this stage, once this plan is published, the authority can start to give an element of weight to the emerging policies in its decision making. The degree of weight depends on the feedback and the amount of unresolved objections and consistency with the MPPF. We won't know that until it goes out to consultation. In this regard, weight will need to be decided at the time of any decision, but will increase as we go towards examination and any increases, any issues become known and resolved. Now, this version of the plan is the one that we intend to go out to consultation on, but we are able to alter the plan prior to submission through a series of minor and major amendments. Minor amendments would not change the thrust or substance. They'd be factual, there'd be clarifications, they would be seeking possibly to amend any conflict, while major amendments would be larger items which are likely to require further consultation. And unless absolutely necessary, we should not be going down that route, because it would, as I say, add a significant amount of timeline and be a more substantial change. In general, what will happen is a schedule of representations will be collated following the consultation. If there is merit in updating sections of the plan, then a further schedule of changes has to be produced, showing the existing text and the amended text and a track change version of the plan produced. So there is a very clear audit trail from now on in of any potential changes to the document. Now, the intention in the recommendation here is to delegate to officers to produce that schedule, but we will, of course, report to the working party the feedback along with any suggested minor modifications in any case. If it is evident that there are major changes or significant changes or some items that are controversial and need to be discussed, then of course a decision would need to be made by yourselves and a report would be brought back to you for discussion on that item in any case without proceeding. What you have before you today is still draft. You'll have seen the watermark on it. There are some remaining elements that need to be finalized. They are mainly highlighted in bright yellow in the housing section. But a few further ones are scattered within the document. The plan is that these will be finalised prior to consultation once the site sections have been finalised because of the interrelation between the two. So the numbers, the final numbers within the sites obviously affect policy HOU1 and the table, etc. So there are some crossovers there that needs to be done. Similarly, we will need to make sure that the viability study doesn't change anything in that regard, although early indications are that that will not change anything in relation to affordable housing. So as I say, once colleagues have finalised that work, we'll be able to update that, and I expect that Mark will be bringing a further section, the whole site section, to a future working party meeting, and to discuss that section, which will then join this section before we can go forward for consultation. There is a little bit more on this in paragraph 2.9 of the report. If you would care to a little bit more information on it. As I say, but a separate site report will come forward on sites in due course. Collectively, both sections are required in order to consult on the single local plan. Now, behind the scenes, a number of documents are still being finalised. The sustainability report, which is obviously a statutory requirement, is in process. The actual essay appraisals have obviously been done because they inform the policies and the sites, and the consultation statement is still going on. It will be finalised and updated with the site's information as well. So the recommendation of this report and the purpose of this report is to seek your approval to move the policies section forward for consultation and future submission through delegation of minor amendments. And once we have that, we can move forward and finalise the consultation statements and the other documents in the background, allowing us to concentrate on that. And unless there are any questions, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Ian, for that presentation. I think I just want to say from the chair a big thank you to you and your team for all your diligent and hard work in producing this in the face of some real challenges, given the shifting nature of the direction of planning at a national level, so to speak. So thank you very much for the work that you've done to bring it to this stage where we are virtually ready for publication, apart from some minor amendments referred to in the second recommendation on the papers. At this stage, can I throw it open to the floor? Does anyone have any questions for Ian, or any observations, or any comments, or anything that they wish to clarify? If I can hand over to the floor.
Councillor Punchard has got his hand up.
Yes, Jeremy, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ian. As the Chairman has said, it's a massive amount of work that's gone into this document, so thank you for that. And it's very difficult with COVID and everything else that's going on at the moment. I just wondered, sort of a wider holistic picture is, do we have a rough, and I know it will be rough, time frame for when this will get out to the final bit to the public? I'm not holding you accountable to it. It's just obviously locally there are questions being asked around sites that currently may not be in the current policy, but maybe in the future, and as to when it would be likely that they would come forward for potential development. Thank you.
I think I've alluded to the timeline there, that we're very keen to move on from these policies. technically it's now out in the public domain because of this working party. We have sent advance copies with the authority of portfolio holder to neighbourhood plan groups anyway, so that they can have a feel of what's coming. There are a number of documents still to be finalised, and I'm sure Mark will add to this one, but you know that those work on the sustainability appraisal and the consultation statements probably got another 5 to 6 weeks work on there. The sites work is coming together, which will come back to working party, and I'm sure the intention is there to bring another report which will detail the consultation arrangements and seeking an appropriate date. I'd say Mark might want to add a little bit more.
So Ian dodged your question there, Jeremy, on and you kindly framed your question in, I'm not going to pin you to it, it's a sort of rough guide. You know, we think we'll get the viability assessment second week of December is what they're talking about at the moment. I don't envisage that will require any major modifications and probably no need to come back to the working party. So in theory, we'll have all of the decisions that you need to make to draft the document. And that drafting process is ongoing. We talk about a date every time me and Ian get on the phone and talk to each other. We ought to talk about a date and setting a date, and it's somewhere either side of Christmas. If we could get to it before Christmas, it would be really nice to get it out of the door. Then you've got to sort of consider consultation over the Christmas period is probably not a very good thing to do. So realistically, we're probably looking early in the new year. I know members are equally anxious to get this bit of work resolved and get it out to the next stage. So, you know, we are sort of paddling frantically behind the scenes to try and get everything sort of finalised. But I'm resisting saying we'll start on the 7th of January because there's a huge amount of work to do to sort of get there. And once you start saying actual dates, then I get criticism for that date's gone by and you still haven't done it. So I'm going to be a little bit cagey and say, Christmas or thereabouts is our working sort of target. There is an issue, and some of you on the screen will be aware of it. You need to sign off the sites. I know there are concerns. I'm sure people will ask questions at the next working party about progress around the North Walsham allocation in particular and progressing that aspect of the plan. So hence I'm being slightly cagey. But if we can before Christmas, if not shortly thereafter, is the answer.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Ian.
Yes, thank you, Mark. That was one of the questions in my mind as well as to where we were in the timeline. Can I just ask for the benefit of those on the call who are members of the development committee? Ian, you said that we will be able to start to give some weight to the new local plan at some stage before it's sort of, as it were, final, accepted and verified, published copy, which doesn't need any further amendment. What's the mechanism with the development committee? Is there a separate item on the agenda from a point in the future to remind the development committee that consideration needs to be given, or will that come through in reports by individual officers? Will it be rolled out in that way?
I would expect it would come through the individual officer's report on each application, and where there's a relevance to the emerging plan or a change in that policy, that they would be seeking guidance from the policy team onto whether it's alignment to the MPPF, it's whether there is a number of any objections to it within the plan. So that's what we mean by unresolved issues. So it all depends on whether there's controversy on it and which needs resolving at examination or not.
Yeah. I think that's entirely right. It's got to be on a case-by-case basis, Andrew, for a short. Because a good illustration would be if you've got a site allocation in the plan that's remarkably uncontroversial, very straightforward, there are no objections to it. I personally would be advising the development committee, you can go on and grant planning permission and attach due weight to your regulation 19 plan. Once you view the representations received, then you see what people have to say about it. If another site down the road is controversial and there are unresolved objections, then those objections should go in front of the inspector and be considered before you grant planning permission on said site. So each site, each policy might be at a slightly different stage in terms of weight that you can attach, determined by the representations that have been received. And the only way to do that is to give tailored advice in relation to individual planning applications for that period between close of Reg 19 consultation and the inspector sending us the binding report. Which is what Ian said, but I just said it in a different
Yeah, I'm relieved that you're both on the same page.
we just have to work together and across the team to, to make it a complete picture.
Well, I'm guessing that I'm right in saying that if we can't approve the recommendations, then we must have been doing something seriously wrong on the working party over the last sort of 18 months or so. So unless anyone has any further issues or comments to make,
Andrew, I think Nigel wants to speak. Nigel Lloyd.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. He's not on my screen, so apologies, Nigel. Would you like to come in?
Thank you. I had my screen turned off, so it didn't confuse you because I'm not on the committee.
Yeah.
But I'd like to congratulate the officers. This is a report that really embraces this administration's green credentials, and I'd really like to thank you for that. Looking through it, it's captured everything I would have asked you to include, and I think it's quite groundbreaking, actually. One question on biodiversity net gain. That's a bit woolly to me, and I expect it is to you as well, but I don't know, it's a calculated gain, isn't it? So my question is, when you look at a piece of countryside and it's agricultural, like most of East Anglia is, personally I see much of our countryside as an industrial one, 2 or 3 crops being grown in rotation, the heavy use of chemicals, etc., etc. When determining biodiversity, would they look at a site like I've just described and say, oh, that's countryside, and I would see virtually no biodiversity value in that sort of landscape. I just wondered, do you get the gist of where I'm coming from here? I ask because in North Walsham, in my ward, of course, I'm going to have to accept the large growth in housing here, and people on the boundaries are saying, yeah, but you're taking away all our countryside, and I'd like you to help me explain to them how we're going to improve it, if you like.
Yeah, that
makes sense.
It does make sense that the biodiversity net gain is setting a target for an enhancement. In order to do that, you have to measure what's there in the first place and produce betterment from what's there. So you could have a brownfield site, you could have an agricultural site. If you've got a beautiful forest or a beautiful flower wilderness, you've got a significant amount in the first place. In order to measure that, there is a metric that has been produced by the government, and that is the one that's in the policy that we are saying that should be used. There's a major site metric and there is a small sites metric, which is coming out from DEFRA. It is quite cutting edge and emerging here, so there is a training need, not just for us as policy officers, but for the DM officers to understand it, and also consultants and developers to understand it as well. It's on the forefront. It's coming through the Environment Bill, and we are slightly ahead of that giving notice that we will be requiring it. So until we get to grips with that DEFRA biodiversity matrix, it's very hard to know. But ultimately, there is an increase on a greenfield site.
I think the way it's likely to work, I think, Nigel, is your standard agricultural field with very little in terms of biodiversity. It will be extremely easy for a developer to show 10% net benefit. You know, changing a field into a housing estate, lots of negative impacts, but one of the beneficial impacts is there's lots of garden areas with lots of biodiversity in them. So I think the way the matrix will work is that most housing developments on agricultural land will be able to show the 10% gain on the site itself without the need for, you know, complicated purchase of other land and recreating habitats elsewhere. It's only those sites that have got high levels of biodiversity already where demonstrating 10% benefit on the site itself will get problematic. And then, you know, the policy allows for essentially the buying of credits through the delivery of benefits where other than on the application site. And I would hope and suspect that over the years, 10% might become 20%, might become 25%, and it might be one of those things that will get embedded in development, and gradually the screw will be turned, and we'll see progressive improvement. But it's a good start.
That's really helpful, Mark. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Good. Right. Anyone else?
John Toy now, Andrew.
Councillor John Toy. Thank you, Pauline. John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, thank you, Ian, Mark, and the whole team for the work you've done. We've seen how it's changed and developed, how we've got all these environmental things, how we are ahead of the game in a lot of stuff, as Nigel said. I think that there was a bit of a key in actually in what Ian said there. It will be the training and development and understanding, so that when someone comes along and presents us a 10% gain, we know whether that's real or not. So by being ahead and starting to think about this now, as this stuff's produced, I think, you know, I feel quite comfortable that actually, you know, the development management people will get to understand it and bring these policies forward in a way that we as a working party with the team of officers wish it to go. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for giving us that opportunity to move that forward in that direction, and for making it a real possibility. And I'm comfortable that with that training that Ian alluded to there, that we will produce the things that we want to. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Right, so I think we've covered that in detail. I'd like now to move to a vote on the recommendations. Two recommendations you can see from the papers. The Working Party agree the strategic policies section of the local plan as the basis for undertaking the consultation and submission in line with regulations 19 to 22. And the second recommendation is to delegate minor amendments in the finalisation of the proposed submission version to the planning policy manager and team leader. I don't think there's any need for either the chair of the working party or the portfolio holder to be added to that. I take it that this is quite normal procedure because the amendments are so, as it were, minor. So those are the recommendations. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor John Toy's proposer, and a seconder, please. Councillor Jeremy Punchard as a seconder, thank you very much. All those in favour, if you would raise your hand, please. And all those or any against, if you can raise your hands. I don't see any. And anyone who wishes to abstain, please raise their hand. Don't see any. Linda, that appears to be unanimous. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, it looks unanimous to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's just I have to flick between screens, and it's quite difficult to see everything all at once. So thank you for that. So thank you, members. Moving to the next item on the agenda, item 8, the 5-year land supply statement for 2021 and housing delivery test result. And I know from the report that we have the distinction of having met our test for the last 4 years. I don't think the report goes back any further than that, but for the last 4 years, I see that we have met the requirement. And now to inform us of the prospect of doing it for a 5th year, if I can hand over, is it Rakesh or is it Mark?
I'm going to do it, Andrew.
Okay, over to you, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark.
So I'll try not to bamboozle you too much with too many numbers. So in the report, there are 2 test results which are scheduled there. And these are the government's preferred sort of measures of housing delivery performance. The housing delivery test looks backwards. So what have you been doing over the last 3 or 4 years? Have you been meeting your targets? And the 5-year land supply test looks forward and tries to establish what you're likely to do over the next 5 years. They're calculated in slightly different ways that you needn't concern yourself with, but essentially they relate to how are we performing against our published targets on housing delivery. The first caveat to record, and I think I've mentioned this several times now, is we calculate our housing requirement in a different way to the way that is required by national guidance. So in essence, we use a different set of household forecasts. They're still ONS published forecasts, but we use a 2016 set of forecast numbers rather than a 2014 set of forecast numbers to derive our overall requirement. And against that overall requirement, as Andrew's already said, looking backwards, we've performed pretty well. Housing delivery in the district has stood up quite well in the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, even through the pandemic, we managed to deliver just above the requirement over the last year. So, yeah, I think we can be proud is the wrong word, but we've got good reason to say, as an authority, we've done our bit. We've been delivering the required amount of housing growth in the district over the last 4 years. And as a sort of caveat to that as well, I would say that the core strategy overall, I was looking back at what the core strategy set out to deliver. The core strategy covers the 20-year period from 2001 to 2021. So at the end of the core strategy sort of period now, and we can reflect on what it's done over those last 20 years. And we set out to deliver about 8,000 homes, about 400 a year. And by 2021, this year, we delivered about 8,000 homes at a rate of about 400 a year. So over that long-term 20-year period, we've pretty much consistently delivered what our planning policies aim to deliver from 20 years ago, which is pretty good, really. So the second test is, okay, we've done well in the past, we've delivered the required amount of housing growth, but what are we going to do in the immediate future over the next 5 years? So the 5-year land supply requirement is, what should we be delivering each year, which currently stands at about 470 dwellings a year. That's our requirement, multiplied by 5 years. And then the MPPF requires us to add a 5% buffer to that as a measure of sort of flexibility, if you like. So we should have in the tank, if you like, we should have available sufficient land for about, I think, 2,399 houses, I think is the number, so 2,400 dwellings. So that's what you ought to be able to say there is a realistic prospect of us delivering in the next 5 years. And realistic prospect means realistic prospect. It doesn't mean, oh, I've granted planning permission for something and I hope it will be built tomorrow. It means I've granted planning permission for something and I know it will be built tomorrow. It's got to be not necessarily a racing certainty, but a pretty good prospect that what you granted planning permission for is actually going to happen. So when we put these statements together, we look at all the large sites in the district, we look at build out rates, we look at commencement rates, we look at lots of small sites with planning permission. We make allowances for future development that is derived from windfall schemes, so things that don't have consent yet, but might get consent next year and be built the year after. And we add all of those sources together to give us a total supply of homes. And then we assess from that total supply which ones can reasonably happen in the next 5 years, realistically happen in the next 5 years. And that figure at the moment stands at 2,503, which, if you can remember the last number I threw at you, is a bit higher than the 2,400 that we're required to deliver. Hence, when you compare what we've got in the tank to what is needed, we get 5.22 years of housing supply. So we essentially have sufficient in the tank to deliver the next 5 years worth of requirement. Sat behind that, you need to understand what's going on. That's being propped up to a large extent now by smaller site deliveries. So the large site allocations, the ones which were made in the core strategy in the current site allocations document, you'll be familiar with them around the district. They're being built out now at an increasingly rapid rate of knots, so that, you know, outside of the large site allocation at Fakenham, and I think one at Holt, nearly all of the allocations in the old plan are now largely built. So increasingly, maintaining that 5-year land supply requires, on that sort of smaller scale development, infills, things trickling through on a sort of regular basis. Major part of our supply previously used to be barn conversions. You know, you'd have seen at the development committee probably 3 or 4 years ago now, we used to be granting permissions for both fresh barn conversions and removal of holiday occupancy conditions on existing barn conversions on a fairly regular basis. So they were making actually quite a significant contribution towards housing delivery in the district. What's happening now is the pot of future supply, as I say, is increasingly not on larger sites, but is on smaller sort of infills, redevelopments, you know, things in villages and towns which are policy compliant. We do have a dependency, and I think things are looking a bit more rosy now on that front, on the large scale site at Fakenham, beginning to deliver some significant numbers in the next few years. So you'll know that that site's taken a long time to go through the planning system. It's about to, or has already got its planning consent, I think about to get its planning consent. That site needs to start delivering regularly, you know, 50, 60, 70 houses a year over the next 5 or 6 years to maintain our 5-year land supply position. Pending approval of the new local plans, that point that Ian made in his report, that at some stage you can start attaching weight to your new local plan, that will apply to the new allocations in the new local plan as well. None of those at the moment appear in the 5-year land supply. They're too early to put them in. But we're not far away from the point where the new allocations will start being fed into the 5-year land supply equation, because we can take a view that some of them will start to deliver houses in the next 5 years. So anyway, bottom line is there's 2 good bits of news in that report. One is we passed the housing delivery test for the 4th year on the trot, and the other is the council can maintain a 5-year land supply for another year. And we're just asking you to endorse that position, and we'll get on and publish the relevant documents. So I think that's probably enough detail for now.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yes, it's a credit to the team that you have predicted the numbers over the last 20 years. So, well, with almost logarithmic accuracy.
Well, since we grant the permissions and determine how many are built, it's perhaps not that difficult a task to target. And then we grant ourselves the permissions to ensure we meet that target. I mean, that's you know, it doesn't work like that, really. The fact that somebody was able to sit down 15 years ago and confidently lay out you know, a plan that would deliver that amount of housing in the district and deliver, you know, within 100 or so of that target does suggest to me that somebody knows what's going on in terms of housing delivery in North Norfolk. And I think that somebody's probably sat in the planning department somewhere.
I admire the modesty. What's the knock-on effect, Mark, if we sort of exceed the numbers? Does the 5% buffer have a cap to it, or does it just keep on? Is it the gift that keeps on giving to the government?
The 5% buffer is a standard buffer, irrespective of performance. So even if you were fantastically good and over-delivered and over-delivered and over-delivered year after year after year, you still have to apply a 5% standard buffer. If you under-deliver year after year after year after year, then the buffer increases to 20%. So there's a penalty for underperformance, but no benefit for overperformance. One of the perverse implications of building too many too quickly is you're using up your future supply at a faster rate and making your 5-year land supply position more tenuous. So, the ideal scenario in terms of managing a 5-year land supply position is to aim to deliver 470 and deliver 471, because for every extra house you build over your target, you have to replace it in subsequent years with another one. It's a continuous moving conveyor belt. House that gets built has to be replaced with another one to ensure there's always 5 years on that moving conveyor belt. And when they're completed, they drop off the end and you have to put another one on the beginning. And it's essentially a continuous cycle. So what you don't really want is glut years where you build sort of 600, 700, 800 houses, because you're then using your future supply up at a much faster rate than you anticipate. So consistent delivery is the aim, really.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. Any questions or comments from
John, Troy, Andrew?
John? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. I also, if I understand it correctly as well, having a 5-year land supply in place and running about right ensures that our policies can't be undermined because we're not delivering. It's an important in terms of keeping our policies current.
Yeah, so two functions of the land supply, are both equally important, really. One is telling you you're doing what you set out to do. So it's a performance measure internally within the council. Understanding that you're delivering sufficient homes is obviously a measure that you need to be on top of. But in the absence of delivering sufficient homes, then guidance introduces that presumption in favour of sustainable development, which essentially means that your local plan policies are out of date, you're not delivering sufficient housing, therefore planning permission should be granted, and it should be granted in locations which are sustainable. That's what the presumption essentially says. Now, that's interpreted as a sort of a risk. It is a risk because it means you're obligated to grant planning permission on sites that are not in your local plan, essentially. But those sites still need to be sustainable, John. So it's not a sort of free for all. Some people characterise it as, the plan is out of date. It's not delivering sufficient homes. I can get planning permission anywhere I like simply because you don't have sufficient homes. That's not the case. The presumption is in favour of sustainable development. It's not a presumption in favour of development, full stop. So you would still be looking at the harms and benefits associated with each development proposal and trying to assess whether it was sustainable through the planning application process. So put that a simple way, you might have to release a site on the edge of a large town, which is a highly sustainable location, but you wouldn't expect to release a site or pick a village for 150 houses in Clyde, because clearly 150 houses in Clyde would still not be sustainable growth, and you'd be quite within your rights to carry on refusing that. So yeah, it's important to maintain the supply so that your local plan stands up and you continue to apply your policies.
Thank you.
Gerard, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just a quick question, Mark. I seem to remember just recently there seemed to be controversy whether we had our 5-year plan, and somebody said we didn't, and then I seem to remember that 110 houses, the Ombudsman agreed with our definition of our 5-year plan. Has that now been standardised? Because I was getting a bit confused with that one. One
Okay.
minute we had it, and 1 minute county was saying we didn't. So could you
Okay,
clarify, please?
There are two major inputs into the 5-year land supply equation. One is what is required to be built, and the other is how much have you got that's likely to be built. Now, developers will challenge both aspects of that. They will say that your target is set far too low. You shouldn't be trying to deliver 470 dwellings a year. You should be delivering 550 dwellings a year. And clearly, if you're aiming to deliver the higher number of 550 rather than 470, and you multiply that by 5, your land supply requirements are much, much more substantial. So the Holt appeal, the Gladman appeal, one at North Walsham, the Sculthorpe appeal for 200 houses, large scale house builders will argue you set your targets too low, you're not delivering enough, you don't have a 5-year land supply. And they're quite within their rights to challenge that, Gerard, and make an argument that the figure should be set much, much higher in the first place. We're particularly exposed to that argument because we set our housing requirement using a different methodology to the one which is in government guidance. So they cry foul. So you shouldn't be using your locally derived methodology. You should be using the standard methodology, which produces a higher number. We've been able to defend our local methodology on 3 public inquiries, and I'm comfortable continuing to do that. I think we've got that part of the equation right. The requirement in North Norfolk is about 470 dwellings a year. And as I say, we've won that argument. We won it at the Gladman appeal in Hull. The other side of the equation is how much of that deliverable supply, all those houses on that conveyor belt, how much of them will actually be built? And developers will say, well, you think 150 houses are going to be built by Persimmon Homes in North Walsham, but we don't think 150 houses is going to be built on that site because market conditions suggest slower build out rates, or something's happened on that site that delayed development, or the development needs a big roundabout on a main road before it can start. So that realistic prospect test that I referred to is challengeable. I can say, I think Norfolk Homes will build 30 houses in Holt next year because I speak to the man at Norfolk Homes and he tells me that. And another developer will say, well, I don't think those 30 houses are likely to be built at Holt next year for X or Y reason that you haven't taken into account. And that's basically the argument that happens at these big public inquiries. The developers challenge the requirement. You're not being you haven't set it high enough. And they challenge the deliverable supply and say you've been too optimistic about the sites that you think are likely to deliver. If you don't have a 5-year land supply, presumption applies, we ought to get planning permission, and that will help you deliver your 5-year land supply because we've got a site that can be delivered. And it boils down to case-by-case arguments, Gerard. We look at every single individual site that can accommodate more than 10 dwellings and make that assessment on a case-by-case basis. So you can imagine sat behind those numbers is a huge amount of work where somebody sits down, rings up all the house builders, finds out what's going on, looks at market conditions, looks at sales rates, build rates, all the sort of things that happen on these big sites, and comes to a conclusion about future rates of development. And then something like COVID comes along, and of course it all goes out of the window. Fortunately, the government this year on the housing delivery test basically wrote off 4 months of housing completion, and local authorities can't be expected to be judged in these exceptional circumstances. We're going to set your annual figure a bit lower this year to take account of the fact that COVID has slowed down delivery. Had that not happened, I don't think we would have passed the housing delivery test this year because rates of completions did fall a bit, not a huge amount, but they fell a bit in North Norfolk, and we would have struggled to meet that housing delivery test result. I don't know whether that was clear or complicated. Probably a little bit.
No, that was great actually, because I didn't expect all that information. So thanks for that, Mark.
Well, it's reassuring, isn't it, that the government have made allowances. In the last 20 years, we've had a financial crash, we've had a Brexit, and now we've had a pandemic, all of which are going to impact on market conditions and are going to challenge pre-assumptions before these events.
But yeah,
in the 5-year land supply.
the oddity about the whole system is local authorities being judged on housing completions when actually our role in delivering housing is pretty much granting the planning permission, and our influence over construction rates and build rates is pretty nominal. Yet we get judged on it. You know, it's our role. You know, I think personally we should be judged on our granting of planning permissions, the bit that the authority does, and we should be required to grant sufficient planning permissions. I'm never entirely sure why local authorities are judged so harshly on construction rates when essentially developers determine what they build and at what rate. But you know, apparently it's our fault when things go astray.
Yeah, I think we're probably in danger of straying into some hard talk politically. So I think I'll row back from that. Mark, thank you very much for your presentation. So the recommendation on this agenda item is that the council publishes the 2020.
Andrew, you've got 3 people waiting to speak, my love.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Beg your pardon.
You've got, I don't know what order this is, you'll have to fight it out. Nigel Pearce, Virginia, and Paul Heinrich. So as and when.
I think ladies first. Virginia, would you like to come in? My apologies.
It's very kind of you, Andrew. I just wanted to add something slightly irrelevant as a result of Gerard's question. I wanted to say as an ancient member that for newer members, just going to a day of an inquiry, you learn a lot more than in ordinary council training sessions. Just sitting there for a day and watching the lawyers make their arguments really brings it home to you how this all works out. And to anyone who hasn't been to one, I'd highly recommend it. That's all I wanted to say.
I would very much second your comments, Virginia. I sat through the Gladman appeal, and it's extremely interesting to follow how the arguments are put before the inspector. So I think if I can bring in you, Paul, next.
That's better. I'm off mute. Just a quick question for Mark, if I may, Chair. There's a definite shortage of building materials. I'm finding out with a small job on my own. How is that likely to impact on completions this year, do you think?
Well, I was surprised actually how well our figures have held up. So we've delivered, I think, 475 homes in the last calendar year, despite COVID. And our predictions last year, when we looked at this year, were about 450, 460 houses, I think. So sort of numerically, we delivered as much this year as we anticipated we would do. Moving forwards, obviously, if people can't get materials, that'll be one of the major impacts on delivery rates and things expect to slow up. I don't know the answer, Paul. It's one of those things that will, you know, builders know almost to the day when they can sell houses. The big volume house builders are absolutely masterful at predicting, you know, when they can sell what they build, and they drip feed the market precisely on their site, so they don't have a lot of product stood there empty. You know, a poor house builder's got lots of houses for sale. A good one's got, you know, lots of people moving in as soon as the emulsion's dry on the wall, sort of thing. So they're very, very astute and clever at delivering to market conditions. I've not heard anybody directly raising concerns amongst the volume house builders about material supplies. I've heard them saying they're very, very expensive. You know, it's costing sort of 3 times as much for timber and twice as much for facing brick or whatever. But I've not heard anybody saying that materials per se are difficult to get hold of. I think cement was an issue about 6 or 8 weeks ago. Whether that's been resolved now, I don't know. But cement was a problem for a while. But it will. The honest answer, it's bound to have an impact. If you can't get the materials to build things with, you can't build them, and things will slow up.
Thank you.
Councillor Nigel Pearce, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Mark, whilst I was listening to your deep answer to previous questions on supply, etc., you mentioned two things which, although are poles apart, yet have a strange link. You mentioned the Gladman situation, bearing in mind that we had passed our 5-year land supply for 4 years, etc., and we've got 5.22. I know that we lost that appeal, and I still like to have some further answers why, when 2 or 3 years before, when I sat in on the Sculthorpe inquiry, we won that one. Now, that was for 220 houses, I know, in a village that couldn't sustain it, and I think that was a very strong answer. But, you know, I'm told, reliably informed, that we passed all the tests for land supply, we passed all the tests for our delivery, we passed all the tests for this and that. We played it all right because that was what was said at development committee. The costs were found not against us, but against the appellant, etc. Yet we still lost that inquiry, and I'm still failing to understand. And you know, can't believe that it's just one inspector to another, that one sees it differently. I'd like to know more, please, why we lost that inquiry and lost our position, because I thought we backed everything right.
Okay, so start from basic principles. You determine planning applications in accordance with your local plan, unless material considerations suggest otherwise. That's the legislation. That's what it says. You've got a book of rules. Those rules determine whether you can get planning permission or not. That local plan can be out of date for a number of reasons. It can be out of date because you don't have a 5-year land supply. It can be out of date because the policies are old and no longer relevant. Thirdly, even though you've got up-to-date policies, there might be other material considerations which justify a departure from policy. So if you look at the two decisions that you referred to there, the Sculthorpe decision is 200 houses in an unsustainable location in a village where your policies about developing in villages are up to date. You shouldn't be building large-scale developments in villages, so you've got an up-to-date plan. The inspector says the 5-year land supply position is okay. There are no other material considerations that are brought to bear on the decision. Therefore, your local plan says you don't get consent, and the inspector says you don't get consent, and the appeal is dismissed. The Gladman appeal looked at the same sort of stuff. It looked at how up to date is your local plan? Are the relevant policies up to date or not? Do you have a 5-year land supply position? And the inspector says your local plan's absolutely fine, it's up to date, it's relevant, you can continue to use it. The inspector also says you've got a 5-year land supply position, which is okay, so your plan's not out of date on 5-year land supply. But in that case, Gladman case, there's another material consideration, which is the delivery of the primary school on the site. And the primary school, the inspector says, is of sufficient public benefit to justify the grant of planning permission. So it's got nothing to do with 5-year land supply. It's got nothing to do with your policies being up to date or out of date. The inspector has applied another material consideration and has said, despite the fact that this is contrary to policy, the delivery of a primary school in Holt is sufficiently material, sufficiently in the public interest that I can justify the grant of planning permission, and the appeal is allowed. So nothing to do with 5-year land supply, nothing to do whether your policies are up to date or not. It's that, is there another material consideration which justifies the grant of planning permission? And you'll remember the council argued we didn't think the school was going to be built. We were unpersuaded by the fact that the county council had the resources to build it. So although we accepted that a primary school might be a good idea in Holt, we didn't think it would be built. And we didn't think sufficient weight should be attached to it to justify a departure from policy, because what was being offered by the developer wasn't a new primary school. It was a piece of land upon which somebody else could build a primary school. So we invited the inspector to not attach very much weight to the school and the inspector attached more weight than we asked him to, and sufficient weight to justify the departure from policy. Obviously, there wasn't a school being offered at Sculthorpe, so it was a different decision. There was no material consideration which justified that decision at Sculthorpe, because it was just a housing proposal in the countryside. So that, you know, there are two different decisions, not really comparable.
Okay, thank you for that. But it's obviously we've still got no guarantee that. I mean, I'm not trying to stage out the meeting, but it's relevant to what I've asked. Is what kind of guarantee happens? Let's put it another way. What happens if the school is not built? Do we still get the houses?
Please.
Okay, a lot of background noise there. Sorry.
Mark, John, you need to mute yourself. John, sorry, interrupt. John Rest.
John Rest, was it? Yeah. So the planning permission is granted for the houses and the school site, and the legal agreement requires the school site to be made available and offered to the county council for building said school on within a prescribed period of time. So the land transfer has to happen, and then we're at the mercy of the county council to then make good on their commitment to build a school on the site. The risk attached to that permission, as you say, Nigel, is that the houses get built, the land gets transferred to the county council, and then the funding for the school disappears and the school is not built. That risk has to be assessed as part of the planning application process, and would have been part of the thinking process that the inspector applied when he or she granted permission. You know, what are the prospects of this school actually being built, and how much weight can I attach to it? Goes to the absolute heart of the way that decision was made. And clearly the inspector took the view on the evidence in front of me. You know, the county council turned up at that inquiry and basically said, we will be building a school. That is evidence that the inspector took into account in reaching the decision. Had the county council turned up and said, we've got no intention of building this school, the offer being made by the applicant is a waste of time. It will sit there as a piece of land for the next 10 years and nobody will do anything on it. And I would have suspected that appeal would have been dismissed, because it's, you know, the balance of benefits would have been different.
I think, Mark, Mark.
Sorry, Pauline. As I say, I wasn't going to come back again. I was going to say thank you, Mark, for that. You clarified the situation. Obviously, we're not very happy about it, but thank you for that, because it is important and relevant to this question regarding the local plan.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrew, I think we can finish this one, can't we?
I think we probably can. I think I caught on the news about a couple of weeks ago that the county council were borrowing between £6 and £7 million to build some schools in another part of the county. So it will be very interesting to see whether the school in Holt does actually materialise. Right, yeah, I do want to, conscious of time, do want to bring this one to a conclusion. So I'm now going to, second attempt, read the recommendation. That's that the council publishes the 2021 5-year land supply statement. Can I have a proposal, please, for this recommendation? Councillor Mancini Boyle, and a seconder. Councillor Jeremy Punchard, thank you very much. All those in favour, if you can raise your hands, please. Yeah, appears to be unanimous, I think. Linda, is that correct?
I believe that is unanimous, yes.
Thank you very much, thank you. Right, so moving to agenda item 9, local plan site allocations for Cromer, and this is the land at Roughton Road, site preferences C19, C19a1. That they are not included in Regulation 19 version of the local plan. And I suspect this will be one for you, Mark, again.
Yeah. Can I just confirm you can see the plan on the screen I've shared?
Not yet.
All right. We'll see what... Bear with me.
Is this the Appendix 1 plan.
There is a plan in the appendices, yes.
Yeah.
I was just going to try and get something of a slightly larger scale up on the screen for you.
Right, yeah, okay.
I'll tell you, I'll present the report whilst I'm playing. So I'm going to start with yet another apology. I think I've apologised at the start of these sort of site issues in Cromer for the last 3 meetings. This is a site C19 and C19a, which I had intended to reference at the last meeting and overlooked. And I know 1 or 2 of you, perhaps all of you, have had letters of complaint subsequently saying, why wasn't this considered? So apologies for that. You know, I don't like you getting that sort of correspondence. Throws a dim light on me for a start that I'm not doing my job properly, but also it's not helpful for you to get that and then have to sort of sort it out. But so C19 and C19a are sites on the right hand side of the Rowton Road. So there is a plan in the back of the appendices. They've been promoted for development almost since commencement of the plan making process. So they came through to us part of the original sort of call for sites process many moons ago. They've appeared quite regularly in the documentation that's been reported to you. And they've always had the status of a non-preferred site, largely for 2 reasons. One is about concerns about access up the Rowton Road. You remember we debated that at the last meeting. The Highway Authority view that Rowton Road's not a very clever road for increasing traffic. And also because the site is part of the designated AOMB, and we've taken the view in previous recommendations that we've got sufficient sites and don't require this one to be added in. So it has been reported, but it's sort of been buried away in the schedules that have been attached to the back of the papers that you've seen as non-preferred options. And it was consulted on through Regulation 18 as a non-preferred location as well. And for those of you on the development committee, C19 was also part of the large planning application that was made for land on both sides of the Rowton Road. That was the application that was withdrawn before the council determined it. So the argument put forward here on behalf of allocating the site, so this is the promoter who would like to see the site allocated. He says it's suitable for development. He says it's available. It's relatively small scale, but fairly early on in the plan period. Would add to the flexibility in your plan by providing additional opportunities for growth, and would contribute towards that overall number. You remember I referred to a figure of 600 dwellings being the sort of target that we ought to be aiming for in Cromer. All of that, it makes perfectly good sense. The site largely is suitable for development. It fares quite well in the appraisal sort of process. The Highway Authority have reviewed their position and are now indicating that if there were only sort of 70 or 80 dwellings on this site, it'd be pretty difficult to sustain a highway objection. The promoter is saying that access is available via the Burnt Hills housing estate rather than directly onto Rowton Road. And on that basis, the Highway Authority wouldn't object to the proposal. The reason why the officer recommendation is not to include is twofold, really. One is you've already identified sufficient sites in Cromer to get to that 600 target. So at the last meeting, you identified the large Gurney proposal, the Overstrand Road site and one other, and that gets you to about the 600. And then importantly, and I think this is the clincher, the site is in the AOMB and national guidance discourages significant development in the AOMB unless you can show it's in the wider public interest. We say that the wider public interest is served adequately by the allocations you've already made and that 600 in Cromer is about right. There's no need for any more. You've already identified sufficient sites in the plan which are imminently deliverable and can address the needs in Cromer. I've got no doubt that the promoters of the site will continue to make representations through the rest of the process and try and persuade an inspector that this site would be a useful addition. But I think because it's contrary to that national guidance about development in the AOMB, the recommendation is we don't include it. I haven't actually displayed my screen, have I? So I'll see if I can do that again now.
Yes, we have a plan. Yeah, it's coming up now.
Is that up?
Well, yeah, you've got the plan up, but not the relevant section that deals with C19. So I think you perhaps just need to move it slightly across and slightly up as well, if you could, Mark.
You're obviously seeing something different on your screen than what I've got.
Yeah, we probably are.
Yeah, I've got site C19 central on my screen now, and I'm actually indicating where it is. So I'm not so sure. Some of you are sort of nodding on the basis you might be able to see that. The plan does appear in the appendices in the papers, and I know you're all sort of broadly familiar with this area.
Yeah.
The Burnt Hills housing estate to the north is this area here, which I referred to, where access could potentially be provided. The AOMB designation includes all of this land on this side of Cromer. And that's the principal reason, as I say, why we're not suggesting that it's allocated. It's sort of a little bit peripheral and a little bit on the edge of town, and a reasonable sort of, fairly long sort of walking distance into some of the sort of key services and facilities. But that in of itself probably wouldn't justify excluding it. The reasons why it's been excluded is principally the AOMB designation and that in principle presumption that you don't use the AOMB as a building site unless it's absolutely necessary. As I say, I'm sure those the promoters will continue to make representations to the contrary through the next stages of plan preparation. Nothing else to say, Chair, really.
Right. Do you want to take the graphic away? That's fine. Thank you, Mark. Yeah. So I'm guessing that in the context of the site's allocations, we do need to be very mindful of preserving the AOMB, area of outstanding natural beauty. There don't appear to be any sort of material characteristics or overriding public benefits, such as wider facilities for the public benefit other than housing, which contradict that presumption or challenge the presumption to preserve the AOMB. So I can understand why this is being, as it were, excluded from the allocations.
Yeah. The public interest argument which will arise will be, is the council doing sufficient in that 600 dwellings in Cromer to address local housing need, particularly in relation to affordable housing? It's clearly in the public interest to try and deliver as much affordable housing as you can. And, no constraint in Cromer, it would be getting a higher number. If we were talking about as I said at last meeting, we were talking about Fakenham or North Walsham or an unconstrained settlement, then we would be striking that balance in a different way. We would be promoting more housing growth as a mechanism to deliver more affordable homes. Where you've got a settlement which is surrounded by the AOMB, it's right that that equation changes and you temper the housing number and you respect the AOMB designation. Where that balance lies and whether it's 500, 600, 700 or 800 dwellings and how much of the housing need is addressed in the public interest is a planning judgment at the end of the day. It's a judgment. There isn't a scientific basis for saying, oh, you've got 300 people on the waiting list, therefore you should build 300 houses. You have to make a judgment about those competing priorities, addressing need on the one hand, releasing AOMB designations on the other, and how harmful that might be. And it's that judgment that will be challenged through the examination process. We'll have a view on it, we will make a decision, the developer will have a view on it, and the inspector will have a view on it, and those competing priorities will form the basis of the discussion through the examination process. We've defended that 600 number. I defended it at the last meeting, saying I didn't think it was necessary to replace the Clifton Park proposal that you didn't support. And that was predicated on my assessment that 600 in Cromer is about the right number. If it's not 600, is it 700? If it's not 700, is it 800? At what point do you stop releasing sites in the AONB in the pursuit of addressing housing need in the town? It's a judgment, ultimately. And you know, your task is to make that judgment and either agree or not agree with the recommendation, essentially.
Yeah, it's a judgment made more difficult with the known constraints in Cromer. We know that we've got vast areas of AONB. We've got the coast, which constrains Cromer, which makes it a difficult but nevertheless necessary judgment to make. I think I would just make this point at this stage that this working party has always maintained the ethos that that we have a plan-led development strategy and not developer-led strategy. So I think what we need to be mindful of is that we should have confidence in our planning policy team to make the right judgment call on a matter such as this one. But having said that, can I throw it open to the floor for anyone who wishes to?
You've got Nigel Pearce has a hand raised.
Councillor Nigel Pearce, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, Andrew. Everybody here knows my situation as regards Router Road. To say they're watching it with a hawk's eye is probably an understatement. But I do think that the decision is put here to vote on by the working party to exclude C19 and C19/1 is paramount correctness. Because of the ANOB is one major region, and that's a staple part of our policy and statutory conditions. Secondly, I've said it before, so I'm not going to whine too much at this stage. The selection of the land on the other side is very controversial locally, and Mark is well aware of that, as I'm sure most other members are. And that is still, although we passed that at the last meeting, to a point to go to the next stage, there are a large number of, shall we say, objections coming, which is going to cause some problems. And on that one, I will wait to see what transcribes as and when. But as regards C19, and as I say, C19/1, even if at the end of the day, the land on the other side of Broughton Road is taken and is allowed to go ahead, to have a green break to preserve the national beauty between any further development and coming back onto Cromer directly, thus radically increasing the size of Cromer. That can't be done. I mean, I'm looking also very carefully at the plans for North Walsham and for Fakenham, and I'm sure any member in those areas understands the local objections, reservations, worries, concerns about any rapid development. I know that I'm going to say we need them. Yes, of course we do. We've got to look at future needs, but it's got to be done by being plan-led, and I think that is the most important factor of this whole scenario, not just for Cromer, but for anything. We must maintain our distinction in being plan-led, because if we are led by developers, then we haven't got a hope in hell. So I fully support this, shall we say, stipulation. And if Mark wants to say something, then please do. But I don't think my words here today are out of context in one breath. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Anything you want to add, Mark, at this point in response to that? No. Does any other member have a question or an issue to raise in respect
Paul
to this?
Heinrich has a hand raised.
Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. I can see that a strong argument can be made in favour of the site, and equally Mark has made a very strong argument against it. And taking Mark's experience in this, that is the way I will go. However, I suspect it may prove difficult with an inspector, and I have no doubt we may see an application in front of the Development Committee anyway at some point, given the history of this particular site. So it could prove interesting. I don't think it's going to go away, certainly, but I'm happy to accept Mark's recommendation at this stage. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, it's undoubtedly a finely balanced site. It's rated on the RAG system as a positive site for development. We know that, as Mark mentioned. So you're probably quite right, Paul, but we nevertheless have to make the correct decision at this time, don't we? Does anyone?
Councillor Victoria Holliday.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you very much, Chair. Is there any connection between the Rowton Road and the Clifton Park, which seems to have come back in, or I'm misunderstanding that? It seems to be assessed as scoring positive, and I thought it's been very kicked out of touch last time.
So at the last meeting, Victoria, the Working Party declined to allocate Clifton Park. In the face of a positive officer recommendation, we were arguing for its inclusion, largely because it's not an AONB site. So that there is a relationship between the two in a sense, because one of the risks of releasing lots of land in the AONB is it encourages the inspector to ask himself or herself that question: where are the alternative sites that are not in the AONB? So the more AONB land you release, the more twitchy I would expect an inspector to become about that and say, have you really adequately considered other alternatives? So they're not, it's the site selection process, particularly when there are AONB sites involved, requires consideration of a range of alternatives as well. They don't necessarily just stand and fall on their individual merits. It's how does this site compare to another option? The bottom line here is, are we confident we've done enough in Cromer? That there are, in several towns around the district, there are sites which are suitable, they look suitable, they could be released for development, but we've taken the view essentially enough is enough. We've set ourselves a target and we've delivered enough. Cromer's not unique in that it's got sites that theoretically could be made available for development. And it's just having that confidence around, can we defend that 600 number and persuade an inspector that 600 is enough in a large town like Cromer to make a reasonable contribution towards addressing the housing needs in the town and the surroundings. And as I say, that does really boil down to a planning judgment ultimately at the end of the day. So the short answer is there is a relationship between the two, because it is a bit of a beauty contest. There is a comparison that goes on. The merits of an AONB site versus a non-AONB site is part of the plan making process, and you have to consider those things.
Does that satisfy your question, Victoria?
Yes, I suspected that. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, yep, thank you. Councillor Adams, do you want to make any comment in relation to the effect on Cromer?
No, I'm in favour of the officer recommendation here. Overall, I consider this site to be sort of poorly related to the highway network, really. We've certainly had correspondence from promoters of the site. I think local councillors, potentially some other members, always sort of welcome that engagement. But my own view is that this is the poor of the sites. So yeah, nothing further to say. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tim. Does anyone have any other comments to make or want to ask any questions? No?
See no further hands raised, Andrew.
Thank you, Matt. That's very helpful. Right, so I think we can move to the recommendation, and that is that the land at Rowton Road site references C19, C19/1 are not included as a proposed allocation in Regulation 19 version of the local plan. So if we can move to a vote, can I ask, can I have a proposer, first of all, for the recommendation? Councillor Pearce, and a seconder. Councillor Heinrich, thank you very much. All those in favour, if you can raise your hands, please. I'm just trying to look at everyone. And those against, if any, please, if you want to raise your hand. And I think we need to particularly note abstentions. Anyone abstaining? I think we ought to.
Angie Fitzgerald has raised her hand to abstain.
It should be abstaining. That's correct, Matt. Yes, that's what I was expecting. Right, so that's carried by a majority, Matt, I take it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, members, for that. So just moving to the remaining items on the agenda. Item 10, business discussion with chairman. We have none. 11, not necessary, as we know, have no members of public or
Just
items.
see Ian has a hand raised.
Yes, Ian.
Andrew, if I could come in under number 10.
Sure. Yes.
Just a point of for information, really. Stalham Town Council have applied for designation as a neighbourhood plan.
Right.
It is a parished area, so the decision to designate rests with delegated powers with planning policy manager and portfolio holder manager. It does include part of the Broads, and the Broads have agreed through their committee on Friday that they will support that. So it's just for information, really, that I'll be sending those delegated decision notices to Mark and Councillor Toy there for that delegated decision in the near future. The council doesn't have really any option but to designate it, because it's the legislation says if it's a parished area, then we should. But just so you know, local members have been informed and I've received no comments.
And just whilst we're on the subject of neighbourhood plans, Ian, are there any currently in the pipeline that are nearing fruition in other areas of the district?
We recently persuaded Holt Town Council and Blakeney Town Council to undertake what we call an independent health check of their proposed submissions. We did those third party. Those reports have gone back to those town councils for them to work through. So yes, depending on how they view those reports, they could amend their plans and submit at any time, but we don't have any active timelines or programs from those town councils or parish councils to tell us what they are doing. We have asked.
Councillor Grove-Jones, is that
Yes,
a hand?
yes, it is a hand. I'm afraid I still haven't got the yellow little doodahs in control. It just passes me by. I didn't comment, Ian, because all we were given was an outline. So it was very difficult to comment on an outline, but no doubt there will be some comments coming in a bit further down the line.
Yes, all we get at this stage is a parish boundary. This is the area we wish to designate. We intend, or the town council intend to do one, and obviously we will support them as best we can.
Yeah.
There is no more detail attached to it, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Andrew, I think Angie wants to say something.
Just to advise that Overstrand are slowly preparing a neighbourhood plan, but the progress is a little bit like drawing teeth. I do keep sort of reminding them that they need to get a move on, but it's taking quite a long time, and they're using the fact that our local plan is about to be published as an explanation, shall we say. But I'll remind them again.
Yes, I think it's understandable. Most town or parish councillors are lay persons, to use the correct terminology, and the processes can be, quite intricate, time consuming and challenging, but well worthwhile in the end. I would say that, wouldn't I? Being one of the proposers of the neighbourhood plan for Corpus in Saxthorpe. Right, I think that covers that. Ian, thank you very much for that contribution. So item 11, exclusion of press and public, is not necessary. Item 12, exempt matters arising from consideration of public business, we have none, and under item 13 we have no exempt business at the discretion of the chairman, etc., etc. So I think, members, at 11:34 that probably concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your contributions. Thank you to the officers for their reports today and for their presentations, much appreciated. And I think I am going to move to close the meeting unless anybody has anything they want to make.
Mark,
sorry,
I beg your pardon, Andrew. Mark, should we keep this particular agenda? I mean, I must say I don't keep all my agendas. I wouldn't be able to get in the blooming house if I did so, because this gives the first draft, I think, of the C19 site allocations, or are you going to provide them again?
I mean, you'll get copies of the documentation that we submit, Pauline. I'm not entirely sure what you're waving about there, whether it's today's agenda or it's another document.
No, it's today's agenda with all the information of the site.
They're all available electronically anyway, so whether you choose to keep a paper copy is up to you, I think, Pauline, but given we're supposed to be moving paperless, I suggest you find another use for it.
Now, look here, Mark, you're talking to a dinosaur here when it comes to paper and planning. I like to have something I can riffle through. Right. I think a lot of us do. I know Paul doesn't. He's well into this electronic system, but I'm afraid I'm into the old-fashioned paper and making notes.
Yes, it depends how much doodling you have done, Pauline, and whether you think it's worth retaining. Maybe that's the decider.
Yeah. Oh, look, Virginia wants to say something. Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Pauline has touched on a subject which is close to my heart. I'm perfectly capable of reading things on screens, but frankly, I find documents that are hundreds of pages long that you can't annotate as you're going along do not stick in my head nearly so well. It is a cognitive thing. I don't think I'm alone in that. I sometimes think there's a strategy to persuade councillors not to read documents by not giving them physical documents. I'm sure that I know that is not the case for the Planning Policy Committee, where documents are always available to members.
You can say that, Councillor Gay. I can only think it. I think most of us on the call will probably drink to the idea of keeping a paper copy at least for a while, if not indefinitely. But yeah, the reports are very well prepared. Thank you to the officers today for them.
Councillor Pearce just has her hand raised.
Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, I want to go home. I want to sort of need to do other things like everybody else, but I've long maintained that whilst we need to embrace the electronic revolution, because it will come on us, I do think when it comes to planning, I think possibly we have to take another look. I mean, we've been electronic today, but had not Mark been able to share a plan, and we've got a paper plan here, I think that is going to become even more relevant from the point of fact of not just looking at somebody's extension or looking at, an improvement here or there. I do think when it comes to planning, I think we possibly as a council should take another look, because whilst we shouldn't have reams and reams and reams of documents like the archives have got in the House of Commons or somewhere, when it comes for planning and you're looking at these kind of things, I do think a paper record is imperative. And I just want to place that aboard this committee, or sorry, working party, is something that I've thought about for the last 3 or 4 years, and my maintenance, along with Pauline's and to others here, Virginia, even today, I think that planning, it is very, very relevant, will always be so. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, comments noted on that. Right, okay, I think we're all done. So I'm going to definitely now propose to close the meeting at 11:39. So until next month, thank you very much for attending and enjoy.